Hello class and welcome to the first video for chapter 11. You can see one of the joys of working at home is this little guy gets to stay with me. Sometimes he's a little bit needy and he likes to be in front of the camera too. So before we get started talking about chapter 11, let me give you a quick reminder. I sent out a video with my thoughts on the recent developments with the school closure. And I just wanted to remind everybody that I have changed the project a little bit. I still want you to do the Excel part of it, still do the comparative and the common income statements, and also do the ratios. But instead of writing a full paper detailing all this, I just want the conclusion paragraph. So just a one-page conclusion paragraph on which company you feel like would be the best to invest in and why. You can still pull some of those numbers that you did in your ratios, still display some critical thinking, and really look at these two companies and decide which ones you would want to invest in. Okay. So we're going to get started with chapter 11. This is going to be a 2-video series again for this chapter. And this chapter talks about managerial decision making. So it is a very relevant chapter, no matter which field you're going to go into. You should be able to read some numbers and be able to take those numbers and make some decisions out of them. But in order to make these decisions, there's some concepts and some terms that we need to go through first. And this is where you're going to see your true and false and your multiple choice and stuff like that when it comes on the exam. And most of this, I believe we talked about before back in the beginning of the semester when we just kind of talked about different costs and different things, but we're going to dig into a little bit deeper in this chapter. And the decisions we're going to be talking about is whether we should drop a segment or keep one that is maybe being unprofitable to us. We're going to talk about whether we should make something in-house or buy it from an outside supplier as a manufacturing company. We're going to talk about whether we should take on a special order that may come in at a little bit lower. They're willing to pay a little bit lower than what we normally charge for our services, but it is a one-time special order. And then we're going to talk about what we should produce when there is some kind of constraint. And maybe we don't have enough materials to produce everything that we want to produce or that we could sell. So with that constraint in mind, what are we going to produce? When we're going, like I said, when we're going to make these decisions, though, there's some key concepts, key terms, and those are key concepts 1 through 6 in your book. They start on page 508. So I highly suggest you read through that and become very familiar with these. But I'll run through them real quick for you. So key concept number 1 is just always whenever we're making a decision, there has to be 2 or more alternatives. You can't make a decision with just one thing. So that's pretty self-explanatory. So once we have 2 alternatives, we're going to look at them and move on to key concept 2, where we're going to look at the relevant cost and relevant benefits only. Okay, this is one of the harder parts when you're going through it, maybe one of the more difficult, because you're going to be given opportunities, and the only things that matter are things that are going to change between the 2 opportunities, and those will be relevant. Okay, so if a cost is going to change, if you pick one situation over the other, that is a relevant cost. If your revenues are going to increase because you choose one of the, that is a relevant benefit. Okay. Along those lines, that moves on to key concept number 3. Those change in costs, it's a differential cost. The change in revenue, that is just termed a differential revenue. Differential revenues and differential costs are always, always, always relevant to the decision being made. Okay. Other things, other terms that are always, always relevant are things such as incremental cost. Okay, the incremental cost is just the increase in cost between 2 different alternatives. So if option A is going to cost us $10,000 and option B is going to cost us $12,000, the incremental cost is $2,000. It's actually just another way of saying differential cost when you're looking at 2 decisions. Okay. But it could be, if you're looking at 3 or 4 decisions, the incremental cost from A to B and B to C and C to D. Okay, so just be familiar with the terms, know what it means. An avoidable cost is a cost, it's self-explanatory, it can be avoided if you choose one option over the other. If we're doing a make or buy decision, if we decide to buy from an outside supplier instead of making it in-house, well, the labor that we would have to pay to our employees in order to make it and the direct materials, we no longer have to pay for that. Those are avoidable costs, which will always be relevant. Our final relevant cost is actually down in key concept number 6 in your book, and that is an opportunity cost. It's something we've talked about before. That comes about whenever you choose one alternative or the other. The opportunity cost is what you are giving up. Opportunity costs are always relevant, but the difficulty with opportunity cost is sometimes it is hard to put a number on it. Sometimes it's very simple. For example, if it was a make or buy decision and we decided to buy, and we could use the machines or the space that we were using to make the product before, we could use it for something else, well, that's an opportunity cost. Okay? If we decide to continue making it, we do not get to use that space for something else. So we can quantify maybe what the revenues would be or what the total contribution margin would be from that segment if we were to put it in and say that is our opportunity cost. Other times you cannot calculate the opportunity cost. The book gives some examples such as what is the financial advantage or disadvantage of closing a store. So you can look at your revenues and your cost and see what you would save, and that could be an opportunity cost. But then there's also the effect that it's going to have on the community, the effect that it's going to have on your reputation. Some of those things can be very, very hard to quantify, but they're very, very relevant when you go to make a decision. Our final concept is key concept number 4 from the book. And I talk about it last because it is the one concept that is always going to be irrelevant in the decision making, and it is called sunk costs. Sunk costs are costs we have paid in the past, which we can't get back no matter what. So in that make or buy decision, if we had a piece of equipment that we had bought and we weren't able to sell the equipment, there was no alternative use for the equipment, and we decided to buy from an outside supplier, or when we're deciding to make that decision, the depreciation expense on that piece of equipment, it's irrelevant because it is going to be there no matter what, because we've already paid the cash out for it. It is a sunk cost. We cannot sell it. It has no other use. So we just have to sit there and let it depreciate until all the expense is gone. Okay. Some of these terms are going to make more sense as we start going through the problems, because every time you go through one of these problems, you're going to have to look at all these costs and find out, is it a relevant cost in this decision? And if it is or isn't, you will come to where you're just thinking in your head, oh, this is a sunk cost. It's irrelevant. Oh, this is an opportunity cost. This is definitely a relevant cost. This is a differential revenue. Definitely a relevant cost. Okay. So for the rest of this video, I am going to work through one problem. I have put, again, a handout for Chapter 11 onto Moodle, and those are copy and paste of your homework problems. We're going to work through the adding or the dropping or keeping a segment problem. And then I'm going to end this video because I'm trying out something new. I got some chairs set up. I'm going to move a little bit closer to the board, move my camera a little bit closer, and hopefully that helps. And after I get this video made, I'll check it out and see how that works. And then I will come back and make a second video where I will go through the 3 other types of problems we are going through in this chapter. So if you don't have your handout ready or pulled up, printed out, ready to go ahead and get that ready while I get my chair set up. And we're going to work through question number 1 on this handout that starts the Regal Cycle Company. Okay, so the Regal Cycle Company manufactures 3 types of bicycles: the dirt bikes, the mountain bikes, and the racing bikes, and we get information for all 3 of them. And then we get a total for the company. Management is concerned about the continued losses shown by the racing bikes, and wants a recommendation as whether or not the line should be discontinued. The special equipment used to produce racing bikes has no resale value and does not wear out. So what we want to do here is we're going to think about dropping the racing bikes. As you can see when you look through the financial statement information, it is a contribution margin format income statement here. We're showing a $9,000 loss from the racing bike. So at quick glance, it would make sense to drop it because you would think if, hey, if it's making the loss, we'll drop it. We'll just avoid that loss. Overall company profits will go up. So let's go through and look at what is relevant. Maybe we have some sunk costs or some unavoidable costs that are mixed up in there. So as I look down through our columns here in our contribution margin income statement, the sales and the variable manufacturing and selling expenses, those are differential revenues, and the variable expenses are going to be avoidable if we do not produce them, so that is a differential cost. Those combined make our contribution margin. So I'm making my decision here, and I'm looking at our racing bikes. If we were to cut out the racing bikes and we were not to produce them at all, we would lose $27,000 in the contribution margin from the production of those racing bikes. Okay, so that is profit. Contribution margin, remember, is our revenue minus variable expenses. So that is profit that we would have coming in based off our sales that we would no longer have. Let's start looking through our expenses. What expenses would we save though? What kind of benefits would we get? Fixed expenses, advertising. It tells us it is traceable. So that means for each product we are making, we know how much we are spending on each one to advertise it. We can trace directly to that product. If we were to eliminate the mountain bikes, we would save ourselves $6,000 on advertising expenses. Okay. So that is definitely a benefit that is relevant. The depreciation of the special equipment. It tells us down at the bottom line, the special equipment is used to produce racing bikes and has no resale value, does not wear out. That is going to be an unavoidable cost. The depreciation expense is going to be there because the machine does not wear out. It only makes the racing bikes. We can't really do anything with it until we sell it, and then we'll get a gain or loss in our income statement. But until that time, we are still going to have the depreciation expense. So that is a sunk cost. It is irrelevant to our decision, so we are just going to completely ignore that. Next, the salaries of the product line managers. Well, if we eliminate the racing bikes, we will no longer have a product line manager for the racing bikes, so thus we can eliminate that salary. That will be a differential cost that is definitely relevant to the decision that's being made. Is a benefit. And the salary of the manager is $10,000. Next is allocated common fixed expenses. So this is when we get into some of that manufacturing overhead stuff that we have done before, where we are going to take the rent and all this stuff, and these are fixed expenses, and we're going to put them in overhead, and we're going to allocate them between all of our different products. These are unavoidable costs. If we were to discontinue the racing product line, that's okay, we can avoid some of those, but all these common fixed expenses, they're still going to be there. We're still going to pay them. They're just going to get reallocated to the dirt bikes and the mountain bikes. So in making this decision, the costs for the entire company are not actually going to change. So it is irrelevant in this decision making. So that takes us through everything. We go through and total all this up. We will see that it creates an $11,000 loss if we were to drop the racing bike product line. Despite the fact that the bikes were losing $9,000 a year, you would think you would drop it. If we did, our total income would drop by $11,000. A way to check that, if you cannot remember this statement, if you're going through and looking at the relative decisions, you can take them one by one, okay? And you can just do out a brand new income statement. If you were to do a new income statement, the company's sales were originally $300,000. The racing bikes come out, they would lose $60,000 in sales. So sales would go to $240,000. And this is without the racing bikes. The variable expenses were $120,000. We cut $33,000 away from them. So our variable expenses would become $87,000, which makes a new contribution margin of $153,000. From there, we start taking out all of the expenses. All of our fixed expenses. So advertising. Our total advertising cost expenses was $30,000 from our income statement. We can avoid $6,000 of it when we cut the product. So if we cut it, our advertising expense now is only going to be $24,000. Next, we have depreciation of special equipment. Remember, that was a sunk cost. That did not change. So we look at our total, we had $23,000 of depreciation expense. We are still going to have $23,000 of depreciation expense. The salaries of the product line managers, it is an avoidable expense as we calculated over here, so we can save $10,000 if we cut the bike line. Our total expenses for that were $35,000, so if we could save 10, our new expense would be $25,000. And finally, we have our common fixed expenses. And as I said, the common fixed expenses are not going to change. They're just going to be reallocated between the two products that we are still continuing to produce. So they're going to stay at $60,000 total. So our new total income, if we did a total line and we just adjusted for all of the relevant costs and the relevant benefits that we would receive from cutting that product line, we would get a new net income of $21,000. Our old net income for the entire company was $32,000. As you can see, the net income drops by $11,000 by cutting that product line. So this is a very good example to show you that just because a product line is not making a profit does not necessarily mean that you need to get rid of it. Some companies keep on these product lines that are not making a profit, and the biggest reason is to hide some of these common fixed costs. Common fixed costs have to go somewhere, they have to be allocated. Sometimes you just have to take a loss where you can. I will be posting another video shortly, and we will go through the other three kind of problems that we are working on in chapter 11. But this should be enough to get you started, and I will talk to you again soon.